basically talking to the Gentiles, and he is informing them. Start back in verse 9 that they are now an elect race and a royal priesthood, and he uses the same type of description for the Gentiles that he did for the Jews, and he's going to continue on talking to the Gentiles and showing them the better situation that they've got than they did prior to Jesus' death on the cross. So before we go any further, I'd like for Doc Akers, if he would, to lead our minds in prayer.
Heavenly Father, we're thankful for this day that we come out and gather together to hear your word. Heavenly Father, help us pay attention today that we might claim something from it that we can apply to our lives, that we might better serve you. We pray, Heavenly Father, for those who are not with us today and due to sickness cannot be here. We ask your blessing upon them. Give us before we have sinned and fallen short of your glory. In Jesus' name we pray.
Okay, so let's go to verse 10. It says, "Whom in time past were no people, but now are the people of God, who had not obtained mercy, but now have obtained mercy." So this is basically a quotation from Hosea 2 and 23. And it says, "And I will sow her unto me in the earth, and I will mercy upon her that had not obtained mercy, and I will say to them which were not my people, Thou art my people, and they shall say, Thou art my God." So this is a prophecy that obviously here has already been fulfilled, and Peter is quoting that prophecy to the people there. And the Jews they understand the situation about being God's chosen people, but this is kind of a new concept to the Gentiles, because in that day and time, before Jesus' death on the cross, the Gentiles were not God's people, and they were basically lost and had no advantage of being God's people. And of course, a lot of them worshipped all these different religions, and there was probably a lot of ignorance on the things that were being taught in the Old Testament, because that wasn't part of of their religion. So here again, we often see in this epistle that Peter is paying particular attention to the Gentiles, and he has the Gentiles on his mind while he's writing this. And this is similar to the way that Paul did things too. He cites this same concept in Romans the 9th chapter, and applying this to the Gentiles. So this was an important concept that the early church needed to get to the Gentiles, to establish that they were elect people in the things that God was going to do. And before the Jesus' death on the cross and the establishment of the new covenant, the Gentiles in the eyes of the Jews especially, and in the eyes of God, they were really no people. They were scattered about, and they were just there. They had all their different nations, all their separate languages. They worshiped different gods. They had different customs. But now through the gospel and their obedience to the gospel, they were brought in to constitute a holy nation, with common interests, worshiping the same God, and following the ordinances that God had established. And as a result of this, before they were not able to obtain the mercy of God. And it's interesting to note that in the original text, the phrase obtain mercy is in the perfect passive participle, which literally means that up to an indefinite time, these things were happening, but now there is a definite time, and also they were going to obtain mercy. And the way that this is written in the Greek, this mercy was obtained by a single act. And that single act was Jesus' death on the cross. So I think we maybe when this was translated to English, we kind of lost that, the importance that it was being placed on Jesus' death on the cross and the effect that it was having on the, it was having on the Gentiles at their time of conversion. So formerly they were, kind of unpitied. They were objects of wrath. The Jews and the Gentiles, they didn't get along. They were constantly, warning each other. But after their conversion to Christ, they were brought into God's fold of people. And there had to be a change of attitude on the part of the Jews, but there also had to be a change of attitude on the part of the Gentiles, so that the two would merge together with one cause and one hope of calling. Comments about that verse? All right, let's look at verse 11. Beloved, I beseech you as a sojourner and pilgrim to abstain from fleshly lusts which war against the soul. So here, quite obviously, is the beginning of kind of a new section or a new thought that Peter was having here. And this style of writing is similar to the way the things we studied, how Paul did things. He would kind of come back to the main theme. And if you'll remember back in verse 1, who Peter was addressing this particular epistle to, he was addressing it to the ones who were out from Jerusalem and kind of scattered about. And this is, they were sojourners and pilgrims also. So to this point, Peter had given a particular emphasis to the manner of life which should be characterized by his readers, and he's telling them and pleading with them to walk worthily and godly before unbelievers and the people who persecute them. So this section begins with a term of endearment again. He calls them beloved, and this is a very common term that's used in the New Testament, to promote the brotherhood of the people. And this term also kind of reveals the warm affection that Peter felt for his readers, and the goodwill that he had and the goodwill that he wanted on their behalf to try to draw himself closer to them and have a better relationship. And he exhorts them. He beseeches them, to do that. And this is a kind of a tender way of admonishing them to listen to the things that he suggests. So he calls them sojourners and pilgrims who lived in a foreign and strange land. And a pilgrim is somebody who remains in a place but for a short time while they're on a travel or some kind of journey. We sing songs about being pilgrims here on this earth, and this earth is not our home. We're just kind of passing through the earth on our way to an eternal home with God in heaven. And here in Ephesians 2 and 11, the meaning is kind of metaphorical and describes the Christian who, as though a resident of the earth, has a real and permanent home in heaven. And that's kind of where our journey will end, and if we stay on the path. So those sojourning here on the earth, that we're a temporary tenant here, and but our citizenship is in heaven. And because we are citizens of heaven, we're going to receive the rights and privileges if we follow the laws of God. So it's important for them to conform to the laws of the kingdom and be the type of citizen that God wants them to be, and they need to have a particular attitude and abstain from the things that the world would have us to do, the fleshly lust that war against the soul. There's always we have to fight sin, and we need to abstain from the things that will lead us into sin. You can set yourself up to sin pretty easy by some of the things that you do, and you need to abstain from the things that will set you up to be a sinful person, and we need to stay away from the fleshly lusts and the evil desires that Peter is talking about here, because they do affect and war against our souls and tempt us to do things that we shouldn't do and commit sins that we shouldn't really be, that we shouldn't commit. Comments about that verse? All right, let's move on to verse 12. Having your behavior seemly among the Gentiles, that wherein they speak against you as evildoers, they may by your good works which they behold glorify God in the day of visitation. So living in such a manner among the Gentiles in a country that you're in, you need to live becoming of one who professes the gospel. And in all these heathen countries in the age of the early church, the Christians and the Jews were pretty much confounded and put in a group together. And the Jews, they had a history with the people anyway, and they weren't a beloved people to begin with. And then you add to that the new converted Christians who were going away from the way that they used to be. They were rubbing the people the wrong way also. So you had the Jews and the Christians both had a lot of people who were speaking against them and trying to fight them, and because they felt threatened that the Jews and the Christians were kind of ganging up on them to turn their world upside down. And we can read in history that the Romans weren't fans of the Jews, and the Romans weren't fans of the Christians either. And there was a lot of decrees that came down from the different Caesars, and they were upset because the Christians were not worshiping the gods that Caesar wanted worship. Of course, we've talked about this before. The Caesars considered themselves as gods and considered themselves worthy of being worshipped, and they were jealous that the God Jehovah was being put above them in that day and time. So the unbelieving Gentiles a lot of times were fired up and agitated by the Romans to persecute the Christians and also to persecute the Jews. And there was a lot of political considerations that went into this, and we can read some in Acts on some of the political things that were going on at the time, and the prevailing idolatries, the idols that were being worshipped at the time, and there was businesses associated with this. So the Christians were fighting against these people that were making money off of these false gods, and we've read 2 or 3 times where there has been a backlash against the Christians because of the things that they were doing that was basically taking money out of people's pockets and causing a lot of problems there. So the Christians and the Jews in that time, and the Christians especially, they had a lot of enemies, and it was not only on the local level but on the national level also. So there was some ancient writings of a Tertullian who lived from 160 A.D. and died about 220 A.D. And he says, if the Tiber raises to the wall of the city, if the Nile does not irrigate the fields, if the earthquake takes place, if the famine or pestilence arise, they cry forth, away with the Christians to the lions. So they were pretty much blaming every bad thing that happened in the world on the Christians. And this was stirring up. Of course, there's lots that have been written about the way that Nero treated the Christians. And it was, we are very fortunate in this day and time that we don't live under these circumstances. Of course, there's Christians in other parts of the world that that do kind of live under these circumstances. So, it was a bad situation for the Christians, and what Peter wants them to do is you overcome all their evil against you by doing good works. And despite the persecution, you keep doing the good works, and they're not going to help but be able to glorify God because of your works and your steadfastness in doing the good things and doing what's right. Because good always overcomes evil, and that's easy to sit there and say, but it's not always easy to sit there and do. It's kind of like the old saying. They said, when the alligators are snapping at you, it's hard to remember maybe that the deal is we're trying to drain the swamp. So it's kind of the same same situation, and that's why he was so emphatic about trying to tell these people these things, because it was going to be a difficult task, but it was going to be an important task. But in the end, though, it's going to pay off, and it talks here about the day of visitation. Now, there's a lot of different opinions that have been entertained of the meaning of this particular phrase, and some of the different ones, it refers to the day of judgment. Others feel like it's a time of persecution. Some of them feel like it's the destruction of Jerusalem, and some to the time when the gospel was preached among the Gentiles as a period when God visited them with mercy. So the word visitation here in the original text means the act of visiting or being visited for any purpose, usually with the notion of inspecting conduct or of inflicting punishment or conferring some type of favor. So the only question is to what the visitation that the apostle was referring to. Pretty much the prevailing use of the word in the New Testament would seem to lead to the suppose that the visitation refers to the design to confer favors rather than inflict punishment. So, I think in this case, and you're more than welcome to disagree, I think the concept is that there's going to be benefits for you to doing these types of good works. And, when the time comes, obviously, a home in heaven is going to be worth all the problems that we have here on the earth. Comments about that verse? All right, so now we're going to change gears again here with verse 13, and Peter is shifting gears, and now he's talking. He's kind of bad-mouthed a little bit the government in a certain way, but now he's going to talk here about submission to civil rulers. So let's look at verses 13 and 14. It says, "Be subject to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake, whether to the king as supreme, or unto governors as sent by him for vengeance on evildoers, and for praise to them that do well." So one of the most common slanders uttered against the early disciples by the enemies of Christianity was that they were disobedient in conduct and disposed to disregard the laws of the civil authorities. And, in Thessalonians, for example, it was charged that they acted contrary to the decrees of Caesar. And we can read about this in Acts 17 and 7. So to refute this slander and to give special emphasis to those that matter most likely to be observed by the people in general, the apostle here, from a discussion of general precepts dealing with conduct before unbelievers in general, he passes to specific, exhortations regarding secular authority and how Christians should act with these secular authority. So when the law of God and the edicts of men are not in conflict, then it's the Christian's obligation to obey both the civil law and also the law of God. However, when the civil law is in conflict with the law of God, obviously we're supposed to obey the rules of God instead of the rules of men. Now, this is one thing I think, even today there's some conflict with some of the laws that are being passed nowadays that are in direct conflict with with the gospel and the laws that God has set down, even laws that God has set down from the foundation of the world, because it seems like there's some out there that thinks they're smarter than God. And I've said it before, I think that God sits there and probably laughs at some of the things that man does, because it's just so, there's no sense in it. And where they come up with the idea, I really don't know. But for the sake of Christ and the edification of the church, Peter's commanding here that we need to render to the civil authority the respect that that they deserve, and not necessarily because of the person, but because of the position that they hold. And I mean, Jesus even said this. We need to render the things to Caesar's that are Caesar's, and the things to God that are that are of God. And it's important that we respect these positions, even though the person that's in the position might be a scumbag, and that's kind of one of the things that's kind of hard to learn. You must see that, Bill.
You definitely have to realize the situation where Peter is writing here. What was the governing principle of the Roman Empire? Pax Romana, Roman peace. And what Peter is telling us here, as Christians, we need to certainly observe the Roman peace, and that means that we don't cause trouble for rulers, we obey rulers, and understand that we do that, and we will have peace.
Right.
We will have peace.
And just from some of the stuff I've read, it appears that in that time frame that the Gentiles who were converted to Christianity had a bad habit of kind of disregarding the things of the law, and they didn't give the magistrates and the civil rulers the respect that they should have had. And Peter, he was correcting a situation that could cause a lot of problems in the future, not only for them individually, but also for the problems for the church. It's also kind of interesting to note, if you look at the scholarship of this particular verse, some of the early writings did not have the phrase in there at the end for God's sake, and there's quite a bit written in especially some of the older scholars. They talk about the Vulgate, the Latin, and all these different versions. And there's some question whether this was something that one of the transcribers of some of the ancient manuscripts kind of put in there. And I mean, it doesn't take away; it kind of emphasizes the meaning, but it wasn't necessarily in the original transcript. Now, the Caesar of the Roman Empire and the one who was reigning at this particular time was probably Nero. And anybody that has studied the history of the Roman Empire, Nero was probably just about as bad a Caesar as any of them that you were going to talk about. And he was just pure evil. I know, they talk about the great fire in Rome, and Nero fiddling while Rome burned. Well, that's kind of a myth. He wasn't fiddling. He wasn't that good of a fiddle player, but he was, yeah. But he wasn't a good fiddle player. But anyway, and history tells us that he probably actually wasn't in Rome when the fire was started, but he was the cause of it, and the reason he wanted to have that fire was so that he could have something to blame the Christians for. And when it's kind of interesting, Rome had a 7,000-man fire department at that time, and they had pumps, they had ladders, they had hooks, they had pretty much the same stuff that we fight fire with today. And they were not able to control this fire. It was a conflagration, which basically was a firestorm. But they did have one good thing that I really liked about the Roman fire service. They actually had fire codes, and if you broke the fire code, they would take you out in the street and boil the tar out of you. Man, I thought that was great. I'm a fire marshal here in town. I'd love to be able to just jerk somebody out and boil the tar out of them. That'd be fun. Can't do that. But anyway, so Peter was admonishing them how important it was to obey the law. And because God does not determine the form of government under which the people live, God gives the authority to these positions, and He backs the rulers of the time simply because of the position that they held, and government is something that God ordains. And you think about it, if we didn't have government and some type of laws and some type of enforcement, it would be complete chaos. And if you want to get an example of that, read the paper on some of the stuff that goes on where they've done away with a lot of laws and stuff. I was noticing in, I think it was Washington State, they did away with drug use. Guess what? They just passed a law making it illegal again because it was just completely out of control. Man doesn't have an ability to control things without some type of help. Comments about those verses?
This is one of the main reasons that the Jews rejected our Lord was because they didn't want to submit to the government. They thought that Jesus was going to come and be their Messiah, was going to take care of them and destroy the Roman government and set them up in power.
Right.
They did not want this, so here Peter's telling these people, hey, these are Gentiles. He
Right.
said, you've got to submit to this.
Well, and it applied to the Jews also because they were Christians now, or the ones that had converted to Christianity.
Yeah.
Any other comments?
This word that's used for submit here is actually a military term, which means fall in line. And that's all he's saying to them, we may not like it, but we got to line it.
Right, that's right.
There's a passage in Jeremiah chapter 27, where, Jeremiah warned them, Babylon coming. God can stop them, repent. And then finally he's like, all right, that's it, I'm letting you loose. And it says in Jeremiah 27:8, it will be that the nation or kingdom which will not serve him, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, which will not put its neck under the yoke of the king of Babylon, I will punish that nation with the sword, with famine and pestilence, declares the Lord, until I destroy it by his hand. And then it says in verse 9, if anybody are prophets, diviners, dreamers, soothsayers, sorcerers, anybody speaks to you saying he will not serve the king of Babylon, and he ultimately just says, don't listen to them. That kind of, it's like almost like, what? I should Nebuchadnezzar is evil, I should submit to him, but it's just, that's the Christian life. We submit. I think it shows our heart that we love you enough, we'll submit to you. We won't disobey God, but we will submit to you in any way we can. So.
Well, I think it's pretty much common sense that if you do what the law says, you're not going to have a whole lot of problems.
It'll have to be a little easier.
Right. That's something I've kind of found out through the years. So, any other comments about those verses? All right, let's go on to verses 15 and 16. For so is the will of God, that by well-doing you should put to silence the ignorance of the foolish men, as free and not using your freedom for a cloak of wickedness, but as a bondservant of God. So God is the supreme governor, the supreme leader, and he shows them that it is his will that they act in an upright and obedient manner at all times, and especially when dealing with the government. And thus, by doing this, it's going to confound the ignorance of foolish men who were ready enough to assert that their religion made them bad subjects, and blaming all of this on the religion because these people were ignorant and they were foolish. Now, the word here that we translate to put to silence is actually in the original text one that means a muzzle. And it's something to stop their mouths and to leave them with nothing to say and to let them assert but ever be unable to bring any type of proof to what they're saying. They say one thing, but they can't prove it. So instead of indulging this vindictive nature that these people had, what Peter's talking about here is he's admonishing them to go back to those good deeds, follow the law, do good deeds, and be a model citizen. And this is your defense in a situation like this. They can do all the talking that they want, but people, they hear one thing, but what they see is somebody who is a model citizen, somebody who's following the law, and somebody who's really not causing any problems. And it's kind of like the deal when you're having an argument or something like that, and you got two people arguing, and you want to make somebody look stupid. The louder that they talk, what do? You talk softer, and it just makes them look just that much worse. And this is it's kind of the same situation here. Is follow the law, do what you're supposed to say, and these people are screaming at you, and they're going to look stupid, and people are going to see that their side is really a problem, and they'll eventually they'll shut up and move themselves on. Okay, so this was the manner in which God wanted them to defend themselves against the attacks, and the way that He wants us today to pretty much do the same thing. And what it's going to do, it's going to silence or figuratively gag or muzzle the critics. And instances, its literal meaning, we can look in 1 Corinthians 9 and 9 and 1 Timothy 5 and 8 and see examples of how this is put into practice. In 1 Corinthians 9 and 9 it says, "For it is written in the law of Moses, Thou shalt not muzzle the mouth of the ox that treadeth on the corn. Does God take care of the ox?" And in 1 Timothy 5 and 18 it says, "For the scripture says, Thou shalt not muzzle the ox that treadeth out the corn, and the laborer is worthy of his reward." So basically what that's saying is let these people go and do the things that they need to do. So here metaphorically, the wicked men were to be muzzled, and the muzzle would be used. The muzzle that was being used is the good deeds that the saints were doing at the time. And as a muzzle, readers, even a vicious and ill-tempered dog is pretty much harmless. So, godly behavior of Christians effectively muzzles the most violent of foes. And the ignorance designated was not merely a lack of information characteristic of somebody who is uninformed, but a type of ignorance that was willful. It was willful ignorance. It was persistent, and it was basically of a disgrace. It's kind of like the difference between being stupid or ignorant. Okay, if you're ignorant, you don't know, but if you're stupid, you do know. You're just stupid. And just remember, there's no cure for stupid, and you can't take a pill for it. So, there's just people out there that's like that, and we just need to kind of, go about our business, do the things we need to do, and they'll pretty much, take care of themselves. So, in the New Testament writers, Peter and Paul especially, Paul particularly gives a lot of emphasis to the fact that the children of God are free. And when man was created, God made man a free moral agent. And being free from sin does not necessarily mean that you're free from the law. You're free from sin because when you sin, we have an advocate with the Father. And we talk a lot about freedom, but with freedom there comes responsibilities to do things and do things in the manner that's prescribed. And, you know, another thing that goes along with it is just because you're free to do something doesn't necessarily mean that you need to do it. And, you know, this sometimes is a very difficult concept for some people to, understand. We're kind of going through this in EMS in this state right now. There's a protocol out there for chemical restraint, and which I think is absolutely ignorant. But, you know, you have the ability to do it, but just because you have the ability to do it doesn't necessarily mean it's a smart thing to do. And that's one of the things, that Peter is talking about here is do not abuse the freedom. Remember the responsibilities that go along with the freedom that you have. And men were in that day especially disposed to allege their freedom as grounds for disregarding the sanctions of the law. And they were saying, I'm a Christian. I only follow the law of God. I'm not going to follow the things that you tell me as the government. You know, we've got people like that today that do the same thing, and they end up getting themselves in a bunch of trouble. You know, and probably they've abused the freedom, and what it usually ends up is when you do something like that, you lose some of your freedom. So, he's telling us here that we need to be careful about using the liberties that we have as a Christian so that we maintain not only grace with God, but we also, stay within the goodwill of the other people. And we need to guard, he wants to guard his readers against such wicked, conclusions. And Peter penned, these words. These are words of caution to do not abuse the freedom that you've got. Comments about that verse? All right, let's look at verse 17. Honor all men, love the brotherhood, fear God, and honor the king. So here's the conclusion of these verses. First of all, we need to honor all men, being more general than the others, and it's in the aorist tense. So it means that these are imperative that we honor all men. Treat people the way that they want to be treated. That's people who do that usually have a pretty good life, and people treat them pretty good in return. Second of all, as the occasion rises, all men are to be honored. The brotherhood is to be continually loved. God is evermore to be feared, and there is a constant, unceasing obligation to honor the king where such form of government exists. Of course, we don't have a king in our country, but we need to honor the office of the president. And I've had I guess it's a privilege to work several presidential things that's happened here in the community, and I didn't particularly care for the president, but he was the president, and it was important that in the job that I was supposed to do, I was honored to be able to do it for the president because he was the president. So that was a nice thing to just to have the honor to do something like that. But that's a way of honoring the king or honoring the government. So inasmuch as all men have in them the image of God, however greatly marred it may be, they are to be accorded respect that is due their position, especially the ones in the brotherhood. So we'll stop there and pick up next week, and I appreciate everybody's attention and comments today.